Today I'm doing something a little bit unusual. I'm going to talk about architecture. I'm going to talk about culture, and I'm going to relate that to the hedge fund business. Please bear with me. This is not me totally going off topic here. The business of a hedge fund manager is to predict the future. The problem is that 99% of people in the business, they just look at the past and project into the future. We don't do that at Orange Capital Partners. So we have to find other means. We look at culture, architecture, we look at certain business practices. We have a principle stack. We've spoken about this before. Today I want to focus on things that we haven't spoken about that much. We've spoken about architecture before. Looking into the future, you might just look around you sometimes. I'm just started reading Sir Alex Ferguson's book about leadership, the legendary Manchester United manager. He talks about, in the first chapter, he talks about the ability to see, the ability to listen. We want to use that and try to arc from where we are today into the future and try to explain why we hold the positions that we hold on to, why we think we can do extremely well and generate wealth and fulfill our mission to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It is March 18th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 8.3%. The market's down 1.5%. For the year, we are down 6.4% roughly, and the market is up 4%. Sorry, we are underperforming by 10.4%. Another large drawdown today, not the largest we ever had, but definitely one of the larger ones. 8.3% is pretty substantial. The Treasury yield curve is rising again. It's steepening, which is good. All the things are good, but it's hitting growth stocks, in particular the ARK Invest stocks, and therefore we are taking a hit also because we are unfortunately correlated with that situation. Nevertheless, we're very positive on the future. We think that all the reasons for why the market is selling off right now are actually good reasons, but there are mechanical problems in the market, leverage, probably certain funds being caught on the wrong side of the trade, maybe also the Robinhood retail investors. Too much leverage in the system when rates go up can cause problems. So we have all these formerly popular stocks, Tesla in particular, but others like Square or Spotify, etc. They're all taking a hit right now. So let's talk about architecture. There's a beautiful podcast that I sometimes listen to. It's a podcast about architecture, in particular about cities, actually. Let me plug this here. Sorry, it's called the name of the podcast. Actually, I'm not even sure what the name of the podcast. Oh, about buildings and cities. So it's again, it's available on your podcast player. Today's episode I listened to was about Vienna in the mid-19th century and the build of the Ringstrasse. I've never been to Vienna. Actually, I've been to Vienna as a child, so I don't remember exactly all the details. But here's the gist. So these people, these are two gentlemen, they're British. They talk about architecture, and they always put it in context of history and society, and that's why I think it's so interesting. They also talk about details of architecture and things like that. That's less interesting for me, but the context, the social and political context is super interesting. So what they talk about here is Vienna, mid-19th century. You have this superpower, this old school superpower monarchy with a large standing army ruling over large parts of Europe. And there is a transition from that into a society that is going to be driven by science, that is going to be driven by law, human rights, legal representation is going to rise. The absolute power of the monarchy is going to decrease. So we have this beautiful interplay. For example, the city is building these huge palaces, the opera, the parliament, and things like that, although the parliament, of course, wasn't exactly desired by the monarchy. But nevertheless, there was this urge to build these palaces to show off. And at the same time, there were these big apartment buildings being built for the new class of lawyers and doctors and all these people that represent the modern society, particularly lawyers. And I find that very interesting. And it sparked my curiosity, and also I think I always love it when I can connect dots, and here is a beautiful dot. So we have this new this new development in Vienna happening, which is, let's call it the new liberal world order, which is epitomized by things like lawyers, by also, let's say, the stock market. So the rise of capitalism is eventually happening. Of course, it's not the beginning of capitalism, but the rise of what we call capitalism today. And it's not necessarily the robber barons of the late 19th century or anything like that, but much more the voluntary exchange of services and goods and services by private individuals in private businesses. That class of people rises in the city of Vienna, and there is this necessity for these pompous apartments for them. So we have this beautiful interplay of the old and the new happening in this Ringstrasse architecture. And I think these two gentlemen are really doing a good job in explaining to the listener these dynamics, and then they go into details, let's say, why certain buildings are more Baroque, others are more Renaissance and stuff. That's more, I would say, architectural techniques. But what does this really mean for us? What it means for us is that, again, we're in the business of predicting the future. And the way we do that is by trying to, first of all, build a principal stack on which we can build on, and then see if we find businesses that can fit that principal stack, because we believe that with the principal stack, we have a pretty high probability of being able to be right about the big, large movements in the future. So, for example, we believe that businesses should follow the 0 to 1 rule of being unique and building a monopoly through innovation. We believe that businesses should build an innovation stack, a la Jim McKelvey, where they continuously iterate and debug and create new or create new answers to problems, and then create new problems. So the innovation stack is a good way to assess the probability of not just the business succeeding, but also of generating wealth, because by definition, no other company will build the innovation stack exactly the same way. So if you win in the marketplace, you have a big advantage. This is exactly why we believe Tesla is going to be a winner, and that the current competition that is coming from China and the new startups there, as well as from OEMs like Volkswagen, is not going to succeed in slowing down Tesla's growth. So we have a principal stack in place that helps us grow into the future without predicting the future in a sort of shaman way. What we're also not doing is, of course, not looking to the past, using analogies and data, and then just extrapolating to the future. That is not just not very useful, it's actually very dangerous. So, for example, now the question is, within the context of Tesla, is Tesla the Apple of 1985 or the Apple of 1999? The answer is it's neither. Tesla is the Tesla of 2021. It's going to evolve in a very different way. It's going to either create a massive amount of wealth by creating businesses that we don't even know about today, or it's not going to do that and it's going to fail. Then, yeah, you can say it was the Apple of 1985 maybe, but even then, of course, the reason they fail is very different. For example, it's not going to fail because somebody like Microsoft will show up and commoditize certain parts of the stack and then make Apple obsolete. For example, Apple was not very conscious about cost in those days. Tesla is a cost leader. So it's just not the same thing. You cannot reason by analogy, something that also Elon Musk said many times. So, but what is this architecture story? Why is this important? Well, other than our principal stack, I think it is sometimes also useful to look at the culture, at the current culture that we're facing. And architecture is part of that culture, actually a visual manifestation of the culture. So what are we facing today? Of course, we have COVID-19. So we have this massive shift in the urban life of all the big countries, including the US, away from the urban city centers to other places where people work, particularly working from home. We also have, so in a sense, we have this shift where on the one hand, we have these big palaces built in New York City, some even here in San Francisco, where the last big skyscrapers which were built, for example, here we have the Salesforce Tower, is sort of the manifestation of the old power, the corporation, the large company that has a lot of employees, knowledge workers that sit in offices, a lot of finance people, lawyers, things like that. And the future, we believe, will look very different, very similar to the mid-19th century. We are also witnessing a revolution in contract law, in the organization of society driven by blockchain. smart contracts on Ethereum or Algorand will definitely change the way we interact with each other. We have Internet 2.0, which is being built as we speak, where trust and identity are going to be integral parts of the protocol, and therefore whole new problems will be, first of all, problems will be solved, old problems, for example, like I said, trust and identity. You will need a lot less middlemen, a lot less lawyers, a lot less finance people and things like that. And then new problems will be created that will require new solutions. For example, you will need people that manage NFTs, like I said in my episode yesterday. So we will create problems that we don't even know that they exist today, and the answers to those problems we don't, of course, know, because we don't even know the problems exist. So, but now, how does that manifest itself in the architecture? So are we seeing things in the architecture? Like I said, yes, we are seeing sort of the old guard, and similarly to Vienna, while the city and the country was transforming from an old centralist monarchy into a new dynamic, legally binding sort of liberal state. Of course, there were bumps in the road, and then we had all the Nazi Germany episodes. So this wasn't a linear progress, but nevertheless, Vienna from in 1850 to 1945 and then 1950 onwards definitely transformed from an absolute monarchy with a very long, very strong standing army to a liberal democracy with a very volatile and messy decision-making process that we call democracy today. And the same thing I think we have happening today, where we're going from these monolithic centralized companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, JP Morgan in New York, or the big media companies, Disney in Los Angeles. We're going towards a much more decentralized world, much more also easier to transact with world, because again, trust and identity will be integral parts of the protocol. How does that manifest itself in the architecture? I think COVID has accelerated the move away from the cities. People work from home, people work from different places. Airbnb is part of that development, where you can just go somewhere and live in Texas for 3 months and then move to Montana and things like that. So we have, I think the architecture is in a sense showing some of that. And I think actually it's less showing itself in the buildings, but for example, what Tesla is doing is a good, I think it's in that context. You have an intelligent self-driving car. According to Elon Musk, he hasn't said that officially, but he sees driving or mobility as a problem of the past, because it's going to be solved by a car that drives itself. So he's already thinking about creating the next problem, which is how to entertain or how to bring productivity to the people in the car. And that to me is kind of in the same context like this new architecture, which is going to be a lot more mobile. This is my point. We're going to have a lot more mobility in the future, because we're not stuck to the office. We're not stuck to where we live. We will be moving a lot more. We're already seeing that in our family. We're a very flexible household because we are business owners and not tied to a location in downtown or something like that. We are able to travel a lot more. We drive a lot more. We go to, let's say we live in San Francisco, so we spend time in Los Angeles. We just came back from a trip to Monterey. So we're doing shorter trips. We're in the summer, we spend time in Tahoe. We spend time in Utah, in Idaho. So the circle that we're moving around is, of course, limited by the ability to drive. I think for us, it's usually maybe like Utah and Idaho are sort of the limits. We might add Montana to that, but we're not going to drive to New York just for a few days or things like that. So let's just put that aside. Anyway, the point is this. I think we're looking at a society which is going to be a lot more mobile, and Tesla is manifesting this mobility in its cars, in its decarbonized transportation infrastructure. So you can do this without adding to the carbon footprint. In fact, you can do this by reducing the carbon footprint. So instead of sitting home and wasting old, gas and things like that, you're on the road with the Tesla, which is using solar power. This is partly because Tesla is very innovative, offering new solutions to new problems that we're facing, and also partly because the construction industry is probably going to be one of the last industries that will adapt to this new energy infrastructure. Now, We started this episode with architecture, so I shouldn't bash the construction industry and say, well, they're so slow, it's going to take time. But I still want to say that what we're seeing today, right now, as we speak, and probably in the next couple of years, is going to be a much more decentralized world. So I think this is the point. We have Ethereum and smart contracts, we have Tesla. Those are two vectors driving in the same direction, which is decentralization. I can afford a very comfortable car for, let's say, $50,000. That wasn't possible before. Hopefully, this will become even cheaper and a lot more flexible in terms of AI and things like that. So that we are really in a position now where we can increase our mobility, increase our decentralization, our freedom, and our flexibility, which adds to the wealth of every individual. So in that sense, I think this is a conjecture. This is not hard proof. The same way it wasn't hard proof in 1850 that lavish apartments for lawyers are predicting liberal democracy in Austria. Of course, that would have been a long shot. And guess what? We would have had to wait quite a bit, particularly in Austria, as we know. The history there was pretty choppy. But nevertheless, we think that certain visual developments, like, for example, architecture, or we're expanding the concept of architecture to, let's say, how people are, and that includes mobility and how people live and what people dream. And let's say it was very difficult before COVID and before the more decentralized workforce. It was very difficult for people to contemplate living in different places on a regular basis. This wasn't something that was on the agenda all the time. Today, it's becoming more and more part of the agenda. Well, should we spend the next 6 months in Austin or in Montana? Why should we spend the time here? If we don't like the way, let's say, the rent is too high or the weather is not good enough, well, why don't we go somewhere else? These kinds of thoughts have not been possible before, and now they're becoming more and more possible. Tesla is only one piece of the puzzle. I don't think transportation is the ultimate solution to all these new problems. We need also better buildings, more flexible buildings, more adaptable buildings and living conditions. So let's say maybe you need more short-term leases and things like that, and less being tied up in mortgages for 30 years. Financial services, which we think will come with smart contracts anyway. So to summarize, this episode is trying to go to a field where we usually don't spend time, and that is architecture, and bridge from that field to our business, or the hedge fund business, and use the current way of living and the manifestations that we see visually from an urban planning perspective, or from a, let's say, transportation infrastructure perspective, and try to see, are we on the right path with our predictions that, let's say, intelligent autonomous cars will become the future, that people will use a lot more driving because it's going to become a lot cheaper, because eventually we can use solar power and basically free energy to drive around, and then have also much more intelligent, much more powerful cars that can solve the driving problem. Therefore, the concept of mobility as mobility's sake is going to be replaced by the concept of going from A to B and being productive or entertain yourself, and also having a lot more optionality in terms of where we live. Thank you.